Welcome to Risk Unfiltered. After about 3 years in the waiting, trying to get you here, it's nice to know that you actually made a little time for us. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into this food safety line of business, and what exactly is a food safety professional or food safety specialist?
So, Mr. Hackshaw, thanks for having me. And yes, nothing happens before it's time, right? So I'm glad to be here this afternoon.
Okay,
right,
great.
on your program. Well, I have been here at the University of the West Indies. I had a choice, decided to do postgraduate studies. And there was a choice between two programs, environmental engineering or food science and technology. And at that point in time, I could not make up my mind. So I decided to see, why not? Let me just apply for both. And grad studies had called and said, Miss Marcel, you need to make a choice. So I decided to go with food science and technology because I said, hey, environment, oil and gas, and that field, those things are finite and people will need food, right? So why not go into that field and explore, right? Because my first degree is chemistry. So I was more into the food technology aspect of it, looking at food chemistry, mixing, matching, seeing, there's always a method to the madness. So I always wanted to know, besides culinary arts, how food works. Food as what we consume, what we eat, what we drink, how does it work and how does it play together? How does it come together as a science, right? So I enrolled in the program. And that was many moons ago. I'm not going to tell you how long ago. I will give out my age because so far I look, I don't look like I'm a day over 30 or even 25, right? I ended up in that program and I was mentored by one of my lecturers who passed, Dr. Bacastillo, into food, looking at quality assurance, food microbiology, food chemistry, food process engineering. And I got a great appreciation for what we call food and what people take for granted, the wonders of food and what food can actually do to the body and how marvelous it is. So I have been in the field for over, let's say 15 years. I have been in the field, food science and technology. I dabbled heavily in food chemistry, into product research and development. And moving on, I decided to go into auditing food safety management systems. So I am a certified HACCP auditor. I am a lead ISO 9001 auditor. And I have, as I said, a master's in food science and technology. And I decided to go into that auditing aspect because I do not believe most food industries in Trinidad and Tobago understand what it takes to enter into certain markets and what is required, right? They look at, okay, whatever flies with our local regulations, as that is it. But in order to tap into the regional markets and to the international markets, they realized that they had to comply with certain standards and certain regulations. And I started to do some freelance work as a consultant with some food manufacturers in basically getting them up to speed and getting them certified and qualified according to particular standards. So yes, Ken, over 15 years in the field, I am heavily into auditing management systems, heavily into policy. I was quite instrumental in the development of a Trinidad and Tobago National Food Safety Policy. And I am one person on that team in order to basically creating a food safety culture in Trinidad and Tobago.
Very interesting. So I go back to that, that very correct and apropos statement that you made, nothing happens before it's time. So oftentimes when I have these Risks Unfiltered podcasts, these interviews, something jumps out at me and I'll say to myself, this person could probably fill a certain gap. And it has happened a couple of times. For a matter of fact, we did a session with someone in the a water utility specialist. And I was so impressed that she's actually part of our team. So I'm saying that to contextualize the following. We have been engaged by a major health organization to train and deploy enterprise risk management into their space. And we'll do a sidebar on this, but most, how should I frame this? So I have a colleague that is involved in biosecurity. I have a colleague that is involved with water utility. Yeah. And so now I'm speaking with someone, not yet a colleague per se, but who knows, that that is in the food security business. So let's push the envelope. If I were to ask you, connect the dots, and how can you as a food safety specialist professional, someone who does food safety management, is there a link between, say, biosecurity, water safety, and what you do?
Yes, Mr. Hackshaw, as you said, food, you spoke about food security, right? And even though there are 4 pillars of food security, food safety can actually fall into one of those pillars, you know, the access, ensuring food is safe for all, etc. With respect to water management, I don't think people understand the role of water in food safety, right? Simple things as good manufacturing practices, good agricultural practices.
Right.
We need water. You have to ensure that the water is coming from a potable supply. Because as I said, garbage in, garbage out. There is no way that you can use unsafe water and expect to have, if you have no kill treatment in your processing step, expect to have an end product that is safe to eat. From agricultural produce, come straight down to, for example, fisher folk. When I was working in the seafood industry, right, the fisher folk would tell me that the ice doesn't carry any germs. And I had to explain to them that if you use contaminated water, right, to make your ice, when the ice starts to melt, right, and if your fish has some sort of bruising or wounds from the process you used to capture it, obviously it's going to seep in. The bacteria just needs an entry point, you know, right? And obviously you're going to have a contaminated end product. So we're all linked. It's quite multifaceted.
Okay, but the converse is also true, where agriculture and the way produce is planted and raised could affect the water supply. Yeah. But where in Trinidad and Tobago are those dots connected, and how are they, if they are, where, you know, the folks on the food safety side are talking to the water folks, and there's, you know, there's agreement or there's concurrence with what ought to be best practice, so that either both sides are protected. Are those conversations being had?
Yes, Mr. Hackshaw, those conversations are being
had. Please call me Ken. Call me Ken.
Yeah. So Ken, yes. I'm part of the National Food Safety Coordinating Committee, right? It's a multi-agency committee where we have, we're looking at a coordinated approach to food safety. We're looking at all stages of the value chain. So members of that committee, you have members from WASA, you have NAMDEFCO, right? NAMDEFCO will deal with the good manufacturing practices. You have the TTBS. TTBS deals with NAMDEFCO deals with good agricultural practices. TTBS they have a standard for good manufacturing practices. The end goal is to ensure that all players understand their role and how each stage affects each other, right? So if you have a plant, if you decide to construct your plant next to, for example, wastewater landfill, obviously you're going to have some problems here, because you're going to have leaching. You're going to have some wastewater contaminating your end product. The possibility arises. So we are looking at promoting good agricultural practices, having the farmers as the stakeholders, the major stakeholders, understand, for example, the use of pesticides and pesticide residues and what it does to the soil. I'm seeing a lot of persons in Trinidad and Tobago, they are claiming that their produce is organic, right? Because they don't use any pesticides, or they don't use any fungicides, etc. but there is no law. Our regulations is not define organic.
Right. So, but Carla, that's what. So I was going to get into. Okay, you guys are having conversations. You're having these meetings, but how are those things? What's the efficacy around the deployment or the policing to ensure that those best practices, that those folks you just called, that those conversations turn into something tangible and real. So conversations and planning are great. But it's the doing that counts. And so the little that I know about food production and water, the entire utility landscape, you know, I am not comforted by the fact that we are, or Trinidad and Tobago is, or maybe even by extension the Caribbean, is that proactive in managing the risks to say foodborne diseases, waterborne diseases, or working jointly to protect the population. Good conversation, and to your point, no legislation that will, you know, that will inform a best practice. So what is the next step? So you're part of the team, you guys are having conversation, but how comfortable should the public feel that you guys, you and the other team members are doing all that is required to protect the eating public?
Well, let me just stick up in, right? With respect to legislation, there's no legislation as it relates to organic foods, right? But food safety is guided by two legislations in Trinidad and Tobago. You have the Public Health Ordinance, and then you have the Food and Drugs Act. So the Public Health Ordinance will deal with your street foods and whatnot, and the Food and Drugs Act will deal with anything that is processed and packaged, right? We have a new standard that's coming up now, which is the Trinidad and Tobago National Good Agricultural Practices Standards, that will deal with the food safety on the farm, whether it be a agricultural farm, a livestock farm. So we have our officers.
That's the kind of legislation at the initiation stage, at the growing stage. So that is being contemplated, but it's not yet in place.
Cabinet actually approved the GAP standard last month, and we are working with NAMDEFCO and their field officers for their farm monitoring certification program in order to get that compliance from the farmers, right? We have the public health inspectors. They are actually enforcing their part of the legislation in ensuring that the outlets that sell food and prepare food are doing best practice. And then you have the Chemistry, Food and Drugs Division that ensures that whatever comes to the shelf here in Trinidad and Tobago is compliant with our laws. For example, labeling laws. Sometimes you go into supermarkets and you actually see some things get slipped through the cracks. I'm going to be honest with you. You go to supermarkets and you see some products that is not in our native language, which is English, right? And there's no way that should have been on the shelf, right? So we actually have beefed up our enforcement, our surveillance. We have joint surveillance going on with the regulatory agencies, the Food and Drugs, the Public Health. We have joint surveillance in order to basically capture these people who slip through the cracks. So we are working, the thing about it, I mean, you know, Rome was not built in a day, and we're actually trying to. Culture is very hard to change in Trinidad and Tobago, except people don't want to feel uncomfortable, right? But the right thing is the right thing. So if we have this cadre of professionals who are actually trying to get the right things done.
Okay. So I know Rome wasn't built in a day, and as I share my experiences, or whether we are training or we are doing intervention in a private or public institution, the unfortunate side of Rome wasn't built in a day is that there's a potential for a life loss, for reputation, or some sort of financial impact, which is the only end result of a risk eventuating, right? Injury, financial or reputational. Okay, so I am now very much edified around what is happening behind the scenes, and proposed legislation around the production or the farming of production of farm products, right?
Correct.
Good. So what's your role as a food safety professional, what's your role in all of what we just discussed? So someone like you will be involved in exactly what?
Getting all the pieces to work together like a well-oiled machine, right?
Okay.
The problem we've had here locally is we operate in silos, right? It's no
That's what I'm
secret.
sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Hand does not know what the left hand is doing. There's a lot of turf. This is my job. This is my motto is
It's territorial.
Yeah, it's really very territorial. My motto is I really don't business who gets it done once it gets done, right? And we have to look at the greater good and stop thinking like that. But as I said, it's culture. That is how it has been for the past couple of years or umpteen years, as long as I know. And our team and my team, we are trying now to bring things together, to break down those particular barriers. And everyone, it has to be a coordinated approach. That's the only way we can get things done.
How long?
Right?
How long do you think it will take to get to that nirvana, that endpoint, where folks are singing from the same hymn book? Because as that happens, bad things are happening on the agricultural side, on the food safety side. So how long do you think? 2 years, 3 years, a decade?
I'll give it about 5 years. I'll give it about 5 years, Ken. I mean, the work has restarted with respect to legislation. It's, as I said, it's the implementation, which is the hardest part, but we're working out the kinks. Because as I said, once you make people uncomfortable, you have an issue there.
Yeah, but you know, if we were to bring in the COVID-19 experience and use a term called constructive disruption, it's difficult for me now, though it's real, to accept the fact that decision makers or leaders are still thinking and behaving, and they are, not just in your space, in finance, in insurance, in manufacturing as well, with this siloed approach. You know, let me protect my side, let me fix my stuff, and buyer beware elsewhere. And until the people risk element of any institution is fixed, then the process, the methodologies, the technology will fail. But we'll get to that. How does Trinidad and Tobago compare with the other Caribbean nations with respect to what we're talking about? Are we way behind? Well, is Trinidad way behind the curve? Which of the islands, if you have to emulate a territory, an island, or a country that has gotten this right, which country, island would that be that you may be aware of?
So far, I have my eyes on Bahamas. Bahamas, Bahamas has a pretty good food safety agency. They seem to have a pretty clear understanding of what needs to be done and where they see themselves. And I'm not, with respect to Caribbean, but with respect to Latin America, Belize has it going on.
And Belize also is top of the water utility folks in the area as well. So they must be doing about a few conversations with the folks in Belize, and even Bahamas, but from a disaster risk perspective. And so what is it about the culture of Trinidad and Tobago, the people, that you think, and we could hypothesize now, because we aren't psychologists, though I play one on TV. Why do you think they don't get it? Why do you think our decision makers, and I'm going to use the word leaders because they are the decision makers, are mucking around with getting things like this correct?
Because I don't think they understand food safety. They don't understand, because we have a data of knowledge or information, I should say, with respect to foodborne illnesses in Trinidad and Tobago. Most persons, they do not report to their healthcare professionals when they have gotten sick from eating or drinking something that has been contaminated. The average Trinidadian is going to blame it on the pepper, right? I have seen it. the seasoning. I have seen it, yeah. They say, oh, that didn't agree with me, but they're not thinking
It's
most
gonna be more than
times
that. Yeah,
it
yeah,
could
yeah.
be more than that. So they do
Right.
not report it. And if you don't report it and you don't have that hard data, that facts, no one is
Yeah,
going to take it seriously,
yeah.
right? Because, okay, nobody could give me the cost of the burden of foodborne illnesses, right? No one can actually quantify how much it is costing our healthcare professionals or health in our public health system to treat foodborne illnesses, right? People think it's okay, we just vomit and diarrhea, but there are some foodborne illnesses, some bacteria, some viruses that can actually cause, for example, abortions in women, right?
Yeah.
Spontaneous miscarriages. And when you see high maternal rates and you wonder, maybe it's the institution, maybe the person could have been affected with listeriosis or something of that sort. So as I said, that there's not much information, there's not much data for people to make an informed decision and to actually give the attention to that.
And in any food safety risk, operational risks, disaster risk, and my colleague Neville Winters on the line, and I have a disaster risk question for you coming up. But data mining, data capture is not something that our institutions are known for. And of course, there are exceptions, but in the most of the institutions, even some in the private sector, don't capture, don't use data, don't do effective and efficient data analysis to inform decision making, right? And again, there are exceptions to the rule, but not enough of that is being done. And in the government space and the institutions I've been involved with, from an enterprise risk management perspective, two things are always lacking: metrics and decision making based on, say, measurements, right? Or enough data. So to the point you're making, the little research that I did that speaks to food safety risk as being chemical or biological. And I think there's one or two other
physical, yeah.
Yeah, physical and what's the next one? And that's a test question.
Chemical, biological, physical.
And allergenic.
Yes.
Okay, good. See, I tend to practice well. You can thank Beach for that. So what is being done to educate the folks who prepare food, who grow these the vegetables and other provisions that the public consume? What is out there? What is out there apart from going and doing a bachelor's? So what workshops are out there? What webinars are out there?
Well, Ken, the good thing about it, in order for you to be deemed a food handler in Trinidad and Tobago, you have to undergo a food handler's training course by the Ministry of Health Public Health Inspectorate, right?
Okay, that's the food handlers, right?
That is a food handler. So that is anyone who prepares and handles food, right? So you have your fisher folk, your food service establishments straight up.
What about your agricultural folks who farm the land?
Right. So they have to get a food handler's badge, whether they are preparing or if they are vending, right? But now, as I said, the legislation as it is now, our Food and Drugs Act and the Public Health Ordinance, it is not focused on agricultural produce. That is why now there is a national GAP standard where you actually have a dedicated standard geared to farm, right? Farm practices on the farm, whether, as I said, it's an agricultural farm, a livestock farm, poultry farm, geared to them so they can understand the inherent hazards at their farm, right? Whether it's biological, chemical, physical, and what effects that hazard can have on the end product. So that is what is happening now, a lot of training. It's a lot of, I believe it's a lot of consumer education, public information, awareness rise that needs to happen for people to be able to understand the current practices that they do and the effect that they have on food safety.
Yeah, but you did say it's gonna take about 5 years to get to the end result you believe that's going to be optimal. Yeah.
Yes.
In the meantime, it's buyer beware for the most part.
It's buyer beware. So we have to do our part in educating the consumer, right? Because I don't think the consumer understands the power that they particularly have. I mean, I have seen that.
Yeah, but let's push the envelope a little bit with that, because if I go to the market, well, the supermarket, and I want to buy some, some vegetables. I mean, I don't know if it was, grown in a flooded patch where the sewage tanks were uploaded. There's nothing there that tells me as a purchaser that these were contaminated at some point in time. So how do the supermarkets ensure that they aren't buying from producers or agricultural folks, contaminated products that they then sell onto the wider population? I mean, where is that check and balance, if there is one? Outside of the legislation, is there anything?
Well, most supermarkets, I should say the larger chain supermarkets, they have internal controls where they do basically supplier audits. So in order to sell at their supermarket, they would visit your farm. And sometimes, I should say, or even most of the times, they will try to take farmers who are certified from, for example, NAMDEFCO's farm certification and monitoring program, where NAMDEFCO has their field officers going to their farm to ensure that that particular farmer is practicing good agricultural practices, right? Sometimes you can actually see some of the supermarkets or even some entities will vouch for a particular farmer to get into a particular market, right? Yeah. Because of that person's standard and how they interact with their farm and their produce, etc. So I know for a fact they have the internal controls, but it's not law.
Right. Okay. So if you were to advise me, someone who's not always in Trinidad and Tobago, if I'm to go buy some green vegetables, leafy vegetables, is it more advisable that I go to one of the more prominent supermarkets as opposed to stopping at the side of the road where folks are selling these things and purchase those things? If you want to offer some advice, what would that advice be?
I would advise you go to one of the farmers markets. I'm going to do a shameless plug here, Ken, right? NAMDEFCO has farmers markets all around Trinidad and Tobago, right? And the farmers, in order to sell at the farmers markets, you have to be part of their farm monitoring and certification program. Whereas I said, you have extension officers, NAMDEFCO field officers coming into your farm and ensuring that you are practicing good agricultural practices. So I don't advise.
And so folks like my good self, where are those NAMDEFCO? Is that like a market thingy that you go to?
It's a farmers market. So they have pop-ups every week. There are about 7 farmers markets throughout Trinidad and Tobago.
So the Ministry of Agriculture, on the grounds of the Ministry of Agriculture in Chaguanas, they have these things every Saturday. Would that be considered a farmers market?
That is NAMDEFCO's farmers market, correct. That's the central location. You're correct, Ken. Yeah.
Oh.
Right. So that's one way you can guarantee, because I think people need to connect with their farmer, connect with the producer, because you learn a lot. Sometimes they speak to you and they tell you, okay, we just grew that, this is what I used, etc., etc. There's that. When you go to a large chain supermarket, you just pick up something that has been packaged and produced, and there is no appreciation, I believe, for the farmer and for the person who has grown this product.
Right, but it's a lot safer buying it from the supermarket than from, these
from
guys
the side of the road. But Ken, honestly, anything is safer when you're not buying it at the side of the road. I can tell you that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm so warned. Where is let's use some risk terms. Where is if I ask or speak to business continuity specifically for farmers? So you reference Bahamas. A couple of years ago, Bahamas was devastated, right? And it's happening because of climate change globally, where farmlands are either by way of drought or flooding. What is being put in place in Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that there's a continuous or will be a continuous supply of foodstuff or agricultural products. We could use the example of massive flooding, which is going to be the norm, or is the norm now. Yeah. Is anything being done to ensure the continuity of businesses in the agricultural space, either by way of insurance or guidance from folks like yourself?
Well, Ken, I can't let the cat out of the bag with respect to
Fine.
that, but
This
I'm going to tell
consultant.
you. Yes,
Okay.
I'm going to tell you that they're looking into it, and they are partnering with some technical cooperation agencies in looking
Okay.
at that whole aspect of insurance for farmers and fishing
Yeah.
folk, etc.
I usually, as some of my colleagues know, ask questions. The answer I already know. So yeah, okay. I still, I am still uncomfortable, not just with the agricultural space, but the water utility. And given the conversation, so that you may not know this, so the Caribbean Risk Management Academy has partnered with the Biosecurity Department of the University of Caville, and we have jointly developed a workshop around the convergence of enterprise risk management with biosecurity. And so everything is about, you have food safety risks. And so when, one could ask, okay, so what are some of the controls to mitigate those various risks? How effective are those controls? Yeah. And so if we say, we're talking about decision makers and leaders, what is being done to change the thinking or the psychology around the management of risks as it pertains to leaders and folks like you? So, and by way of this conversation, it would seem to me that we or the folks in Trinidad and Tobago, or the institutions in Trinidad and Tobago, have some ways to go. Is that a good summation of the conversation we have had? Yeah.
Yeah, we have some way. We have a long way to go, Ken. But I will assure you that we are walking. We are not standing still.
Right, but again, as a full-blown risk practitioner, while we are walking, bad things are happening. That's just the reality of it. It's done. So, in the essence of time, Carla Boyce, I guess we could go on and having these conversations, this discussion, because there's so many other things we wanted to talk about. But again, I want to thank you. I thank you for sharing your expertise. And I do hope that it finds what you're espousing here finds a listening and activated ear, not just yeah, let's talk about it. Enough talk, time to do. So again, I thank you. I thank you for the time.